Hey folks, Michael Jonas from Commonwealth Magazine here. And before we get into this week's episode of the Codcast, I want to take a minute to talk to you about Commonwealth's We Report, You Support fundraising campaign. The Codcast has been a great addition to the Commonwealth lineup, and it's clear that listeners like you enjoy getting to hear interviews in their most authentic form. As we grow our reader base, we hope to keep bringing you fresh ways of reporting, but to do that, we need your help. Please support Commonwealth and the Codcast by donating to the We Report, You Support campaign today. You can find the link at commonwealthmagazine.org right at the top of our homepage. Thanks again for your support. Now, on to the Codcast. It seemed like the worst kept secret in Boston, and now it's official. City Councilor Michelle Wu is running for mayor. Michelle Wu has become known for her focus on big public policy issues. A year ago, she released a detailed report making a case for a wholesale restructuring of Boston's planning and development process. She has become a relentless advocate for MBTA riders, diving into an issue that is formally under state control, which often affects Boston residents more than many city agencies do. In her campaign announcement video, she said her work since being elected city councilor has, quote, changed the conversation about what is just and what is possible. I'm here with my colleague, Bruce Moll, and we're happy to be joined on the Codcast by City Councilor Michelle Wu, and we are eager to hear what would be possible under a Mayor Michelle Wu administration at Boston City Hall. Michelle Wu, welcome.
Thank you so much. It's always great to be with you.
And so we'd love to get into the big issues of the race, but before we do, I'd like to sort of just dive a little bit into your background and help listeners get to know you a little bit better. One thing I think I was struck by in reading stories on your sort of rise through politics is that you weren't really a political junkie growing up. I even read a piece saying when you arrived here in Boston to go to college in 2004, you didn't even really identify as a Republican or a Democrat. And sort of on top of that, you've been described as fairly shy person. So when you put together sort of someone not that into politics who's fairly shy, it frankly does not sound like the profile of a future candidate for mayor of Boston.
Some days it's still a shock. Yeah, that's absolutely right. I grew up as the daughter of immigrants, the oldest child in our family. And when my parents arrived in this country, they didn't speak English. And so not only did I not see people who looked like me in positions of leadership, we were never in spaces as a family I had never met an elected official my entire childhood up through, I think, college was the first time I actually met someone who was serving in office. And, I realized later on that this was an intentional decision by my parents in a lot of ways. We never discussed politics at the dinner table, barely talked about current events. And
why is that?
They never came quite out and said it, but I have put together that over the generations in my family, we've seen multiple generations of immigration. My parents from Taiwan to the US, they themselves being children of immigrants as their parents had fled civil war in mainland China over to Taiwan. And so in our family tree, politics was fear and famine and corruption. And so they very much wanted to shield all of us from that as kids. And it wasn't until I think there's a moment in each of our lives when many of the bubbles burst, the shields come up, and my mother's struggle with mental illness, her mental health crisis, and how quickly that came on, leaving me at age 22, 23, raising my sisters and taking care of her, very quickly having to deal with just how much government mattered and how much politics mattered on top of that.
I wonder if you might be able to go a little bit slower through that biographical rundown. You grew up in Chicago, is that right? And sort of what was your circumstances there?
Yeah, we moved around a couple times, but my parents immigrated from Taiwan in the early 1980s and landed in Chicago, where my dad was studying, and my mom at first was working at the Chinatown Library in Chicago as her kind of only way to stay connected to a sense of familiarity. As the family grew and as my dad got different jobs, my parents always prioritized trying to buy that next smallest house in the best school district they could afford. And we moved around a few times in the Midwest and ended up, for me, going to school in public schools in suburban Chicago. And, there was a sense very much that not only did my parents face barriers from language or culture, but the economic situation between my family and other kids at my school was very different. Very clear that there were disparities, and that my parents' sacrifices to get us there to the best possible schools they could, buy a house to access, very much was front and center in making sure that we were working hard, trying to study hard, trying to, to kind of live out that, quote unquote, American dream.
What did your father do?
My dad is a scientist. He studied chemical engineering and has worked on, how he explains it is making batteries smaller and smaller. And so that could be batteries in watches or batteries in other, other devices. But he kind of, I remember when we were very young, getting to visit some of the labs and things like that, and seeing his career progress and our family's economic station move along with that was very much a part of why they gave up a lot to come to this country for the chance of that opportunity.
And you ended up, if I have it right, after college, you came here and went to Harvard for undergraduate, but then you went back home afterwards, and that's around that time that I think, if I have it right, your mother began to be not well, and you sort of assumed this kind of caretaking role, and even then briefly sort of started a small business. And I don't know if you were thinking that would be what you would do. I've read that you thought maybe your family or your mother would run it.
Yeah, my mom stayed home with the kids her entire adult life, and she is brilliant. She's full of she sings. She would fill up every room with her personality. And I still remember so many gems that, in Mandarin that she's passed down to me of how to think about life and issues and people and all this. And so, I have very fond and vivid memories of everything that she kind of imparted to me as the oldest child. And it's been a very different experience for my younger siblings because her mental health crisis happened when they were much younger. And so I always had in my mind that my mom would kind of say, one day when we were all grown up and left, she could retire from being a stay-at-home mom, taking care of the kids and trying to do everything, and open a little tea house for herself. She drank tea every day, Chinese tea, loved it. That was her kind of way to relax. And so it was towards the very end of my time in college that we started to realize something was happening at home. And it seemed kind of just strange at first, but maybe not too, we had no idea how quickly everything would accelerate. At first, just some kind of ominous messages from my mom. She started not to pick up the phone as much, not to talk, not to want to engage as much. And then it rather quickly accelerated over a period of a few months to delusions and paranoia and not eating and sleeping and, self-medicating with alcohol for a bit of time and just not being able to care for my sisters, at the same time as her marriage was coming apart a little bit as well. And so that left my sisters at home with all of this happening. When I got that call one day that it was so bad that I needed to return immediately, took leave from my job downtown in Boston, my first job out of college, and went back to where my family was in the suburbs of Chicago, and realized that it was very, very bad at that point, and that I would need to be there for some time to stabilize the family. So as part of that, dealing with the healthcare situation, dealing with the school situation with my sisters, and thinking that, we could open a little tea house that my mom had always dreamed of. And maybe, I kind of naively thought that as quickly as everything had happened, maybe getting some sense of stability, keeping us going, and eventually I could pass that back off to her and go back to, the life that I had back in Boston.
What did you major in at undergrad?
this was a whole journey in and of itself. So I ended up majoring in economics. I started on day one as a biology major, right? My parents always wanted a doctor in the family. And so that was very much the expectation that I was supposed to be a, good immigrant family daughter and take care of that. I quickly realized that was not for me. And so we had a whole negotiation process my first couple of years of college. I actually wanted to study history or social studies and be thinking a little bit more about how everything fits together in our society. And they said, well, if not a doctor, at least you have to make some money. So economics was kind of the compromise there. And I got to do a little bit of both. But I spent most of my time actually in college outside of the classroom, spending time in the city. So I would come to Chinatown every single weekend as a student, take the Red Line, over the Charles River, and teach classes to seniors in Chinatown who were seeking to become naturalized U.S. citizens. And that was my home. That was my home away from home, that feeling of being surrounded by amazing people who had given up so much to come to this country for their families, and getting to help them a little bit in navigating a very important part of their life.
That's interesting. I mean, that sort of prefigures, I guess, sort of an involvement in Boston life in a way that I think is kind of unusual. I mean, usually you hear about a lot of students at Harvard or at other schools, they stay in a close circle right around their campus, kind of in the campus bubble or cocoon. But it sounds like that was not sort of what defined your college years in the same way.
And I mean, my parents very much kept my siblings and me in our own bubble, right? As I said, we didn't talk about, politics or anything. And this going to Harvard, right, getting that scholarship and coming to Boston was really my first time away from home for an extended period of time. We were never, didn't have money to do the sleepaway camps or anything like that. So I was very homesick, honestly, for a while in the beginning. And Chinatown was very much a way to feel secure again and at home again. And it really rooted me in Boston, realizing that here was a community of people who I felt so close to and so connected to, who were coming to a neighborhood. Not everyone lived there, but this was the hub for so many families. And this is where they were accessing services important to every aspect of their lives, right? It wasn't just that they were coming to learn how to become U.S. citizens and take that test. They were accessing housing stability services through the Asian Community Development Corporation, ACDC, and their grandkids were able to be in childcare at the Boston Chinatown Neighborhood Center. And there were English language classes at the Asian American Civic Association. And so just seeing the resources available to surround a community from all sides was really remarkable. And I think if not for feeling so connected to Chinatown, I mean, I very quickly decided in my head in my time in college that this was going to be my city. This is where I would stay and raise my family, and really fell in love with Boston.
And then you did, in fact, after being back home a little while, and as from what I've read, opened the tea shop, but that didn't last long. You got applied and got into Harvard Law School. But again, I think this is probably, I'm guessing you were unique among your classmates, but you arrived at law school with your mother and your sisters. I mean, you kind of moved all of them with you. Your sisters were still young and, in grade schools, and your mother not well. And so as the caretaker, if you were going to go to law school, I guess sort of like you decided they were going to also. I mean, not that they came to classes, but you all came to Boston. And then, I mean, that's just sort of a remarkable story in and of itself. But also, I mean, what's interesting is that you said you didn't really have a political kind of antenna or kind of interest, and it was something shunned. But you kind of quickly in college immersed yourself in community issues, which is, not politics sort of with a capital P, but in a lot of ways, and we'll get to sort of the issues around city politics, it's not that divorced from kind of, what are the issues affecting kind of just everyday lives of people in the city. You were there helping, tutor or work with senior citizens in Chinatown. So if you didn't have a kind of political interest, you had a sort of outward looking sort of community focus, it sounds like, or an interest in being involved in the community.
I think in some ways, I don't want to overgeneralize. I was going to say it might be an experience that children of immigrants share, but I'll just say, at least for myself, it was so much of who I am comes from seeing how my family and my parents had to navigate this world. And that as a young child, 4, 5, 6 years old, I was the guide and the interpreter for my family in a lot of cases, because they could not, there was a big language barrier. And so we would be at the grocery store or at school at the parent-teacher conference, and they would rely on a young, a little person to be communicating on their behalf. And so it always has sat with, it just, from my first sort of sense of consciousness about the world, knowing how there are invisible barriers and walls up, and feeling a need to try to take some of those down, or at least help ease, because I, from a young age, could flow back and forth between some of these walls that my parents could not overcome. And I think that sense in Chinatown as a student was very strong. We would have our class and we practice, at that time it was a different exam. There were a lot of sort of civics questions you had to learn and practice. And then after class, some of my students, the seniors would pull out their bags, and there would be a letter that they needed help with, that, their electricity bill was overdue and they couldn't understand and needed help understanding, getting some guidance on what to do or who to call. And so it's all connected when you realize there are so many resources all around. The services are there. The point of our government in such a well-resourced city is to provide that support. And yet the disconnect when people most need that help is huge, and it doesn't take that much to bridge that.
Where did you come to learn Spanish?
In law school.
How did that come about?
I took years of classes, and in fact also really learned so much from trying to push outside of the school bubble with that too. So as part of some of those classes, took I think it was a seminar or something where the goal was that you would be immersed in a local community organization that would serve Spanish speakers. And so I got to spend a semester at first, and then a little longer working at OISTE, the Latinx community-focused civic engagement organization in Boston, and then meeting the Puerto Rican Veterans Monument Square Association, working to help them set up the very first monument to Puerto Rican veterans and the 65th Regiment anywhere in the country, right here in Boston, right at Villa Victoria. And just, again, getting to know, love, be so connected to a community that contributes to the city's strength and diversity and vibrancy, and yet is often facing some of these invisible barriers.
So I'm sorry for all the details, but were you taking the classes at Harvard, or you were doing that outside?
Yep.
At Harvard?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, for people who maybe hadn't seen this or noticed it, Bruce's reference, Counselor Wu recorded her kickoff campaign video, not only in English, but in Mandarin and Spanish. It's hard to not be impressed by that. For those of us who struggle just in one language to sound coherent, it was pretty impressive. And Mandarin, did you ever take that formally, or that knowledge is just entirely from growing up with it?
Well, it's interesting because my parents barely spoke any English when I was born, and so it was just not Mandarin's my first language. It's very different speaking formal Mandarin compared to just what you would say kind of around the house. And so my comfort level is very much in the kind of casual spoken language. The written part of the language is very complicated, so I've taken from when I was very little classes on the weekends to try to learn that, and some more in school as well. But it is sort of ingrained in me as my first language. As the kids grew older and as my parents' English fluency did get better, there's a little bit of a gap between me and the siblings of kind of how that was transferred down in the family. Yeah, I mean, I should note, part of what really drove me to think about how I would spend my time in law school, and not just taking the legal classes that you're supposed to take, but really, for example, spending time trying to learn Spanish and be involved in the community, you know, interning, for example, in City Hall and working at Boston Medical Center during that time as well. In my very first summer before law school, before classes actually started, I spent some time at the Legal Services Center near the Stony Brook T-stop in Jamaica Plain. And so there, I had come off of an experience in my own life trying to navigate bureaucracies related to opening a small business and running a small family endeavor, being hugely frustrated by that. And then having the chance to work in a legal clinic where we could support community members trying to do the same thing. And again, recognizing that not only was it barriers because it was a complicated process and there was, you know, not the information wasn't all in one place, and there are all these decision trees that were incredibly opaque, but many clients and community members who faced an additional language barrier on top of that. So several of the clients that we were helping were experiencing that. So wanted to make sure to do what I could to break down some more barriers as well in terms of learning Spanish.
And so I do want to turn, you know, to sort of the sort of current day news and your time as a city councilor, and now the even more recent news as a mayoral candidate. But I guess I am struck that, you know, if you kind of, you know, you can kind of reverse engineer people's lives away and you look at this stuff. I mean, a lot of stuff points to this interest in kind of sort of, you know, and that's what people describe city government as, kind of, you know, where government kind of meets people on the ground. And so, you know, whether it's the work you did in Chinatown or at this legal services clinic, you know, it's kind of the really everyday ways that people intersect with government, or that they're frustrated by it. And in some ways, that's sort of what city government is. We hear a lot. And at the same time, I think especially today, with sort of the sweep of all these huge issues nationally, or whether it's, you know, sort of what's happened with sort of income inequality, issues around racial justice that are much bigger, more sweeping issues. And I guess what's I think really interesting about the time we're in now is that you have city officials that are sort of trying to address both. They're trying to sort of be there for the things you think about at the really local level that city government is there for, but are also kind of voices on these big issues. And I guess that's maybe kind of a good transition to your work, that you then decided at one point, I'm going to run for city council. Again, I've read that people were shocked by that. Again, it just isn't sort of maybe how people saw you kind of jumping into the political mix. You know, of all places, Boston, you know, there's this sort of reputation of kind of old style rough and tumble politics, but there you were, you know, running in 2013 and, you know, doing extremely well, coming in, I think, second. Is that right, in the at-large race in your first run?
Yes, that's right.
And so it's sort of to, you know, sort of get to where we're at today. You were elected in 2013. It was the same year that Marty Walsh was elected mayor. So you've kind of sort of your time in City Hall has kind of tracked alongside one another, and now you're running. So I guess, you know, kind of just to sort of put it straight to you, you know, to run, where has the mayor kind of left the city short that kind of makes the urgency of a run now so sensible to you?
This is a moment that is unprecedented, a truly once in a generation moment in our city and beyond as well, where in the midst of an ongoing pandemic and an economic crisis, our continuing climate crisis, a national reckoning on systemic racism, we are seeing that the issues community members were always lifting up are now life and death. The very issues that COVID-19 has deepened and exposed were in fact what communities have had to confront for decades and generations. And so, you know, in my time on the city council, I've seen that when you dig in and start to reimagine what's possible for our city, what we can get done, what we are aiming for, and you're able to bring people into that conversation to push for that scale and urgency of change, we can get things done pretty quickly in Boston. We have resources here. We have some of the most active, engaged residents of anywhere. I will put our civic associations and our community leaders up against any city's activists. And we have the ideas, the incredible expertise of where we should be going, what the solutions are, both from the community grassroots level all the way to the powerhouse institutions in this area. And what we're missing, what we need to just connect all the dots, is leadership that has that sense of bold aspiration, urgent action, and community-based vision.
And you don't think the mayor has that?
We have seen in the last 7-8 years one of the biggest building booms in Boston's history, right? Incredible growth, success, and wealth pouring into our city. And yet all of the disparities that we are most concerned about, that COVID has highlighted, have been deepening that entire time. Greater accelerating displacement, our schools still struggling to provide access to a baseline, much less high quality, excellent education for every single child, a public health infrastructure that left us short, where we could have been in terms of the resources of our healthcare institutions, a development process that is still based on insider connections and special exceptions to an outdated zoning code, which has increased racial and economic disparities with every decision that has been made. Missed opportunities for Boston to connect our resources with the scale and the urgency of our challenges. This isn't about any particular person. This is really about the systemic issues that communities have been facing and the possibility for us to actually confront them and tackle them.
But it sounds like, you're saying that there was an opportunity for more transformational change, and I'm maybe putting words in your mouth that, under the mayor, it's been more maybe just kind of incremental building off of the template of what the city's been doing for years, and that's not quite enough at this moment. Is that a fair way to put it? Or
we are in such a significant moment, such a crisis across all different metric, right? Our democracy is at stake, our climate, our housing stability. The actions that we take or don't take in this moment will really have an impact for generations to come. And we can't afford to have reactive leadership. It's been clear. If anything, COVID has exposed that business as usual was already failing Bostonians. We were already very fragile in that pre-existing status quo of who had housing stability or access to food security or reliable transit access. And so, if anything, we have also seen during this time that when we choose to act, we can do big things that were previously thought impossible, like getting technology to almost every child. We're still pushing to get the rest of the way there. Working on a meals program to touch families all across the city. This is a moment where we have to not just reimagine our systems and what Boston could be. It is necessary for us to do that if we are going to actually recover from this crisis.
And I just want to also, talk a little bit about the dynamics of the race now. Just in the last few days, the race, it's a little awkward to talk about it now. There are two people running for mayor, yourself and your colleague, Councilor Andrea Campbell now, because as people may have read, the mayor has actually not said that he's yet going to be a candidate for re-election. There's a lot of speculation around that. But Councilor Campbell, just in recent days announced that she's in the race as well. And, I guess I have to say in some sort of broad brushstroke way, there's certainly some common themes that I think you're both articulating. And you said in your video, you're fighting a system that wasn't built for us at one point. You know what it's like to be unseen and unheard. Those are really themes that that she's sounding some version of as well. Sort of this idea of needing or wanting a city government that works for everyone, and sort of calling out the idea that it hasn't been that way. So how's that dynamic going to work? A lot of people have speculated, if we assume, say, the mayor is going to run, if we assume with $5 million and the powers of incumbency that he might have a shot of being one of the two candidates to make it into a final election, it sort of then is sort of, yourself and your colleague kind of battling to be the one that would oppose him in a final. How's that going to work?
I have tremendous respect for my colleague. This race is about the people of Boston and the struggles and the dreams across all of our neighborhoods and communities. We are starting early, right? This is usually a couple months more than your typical citywide campaign, perhaps.
And if I'm right, the mayor even got you started even a few days earlier than you were planning.
I'm not going to be the one to comment on a private conversation. We are starting early to ensure that there's enough time to do this right. It's about organizing and building community in every neighborhood, because the scale of changes that we're hoping to earn a mandate on will require sustained community participation and empowerment all the way past election day. But in some ways, just as importantly, this is about having enough time to have a full conversation with the city of Boston about where we need to go. Not just a quick snapshot or policy platform that goes up on the website and then people do a little research and ask some questions and then go into vote, but going in and listening and building our policy from the needs of communities, having multiple iterations of what people want to see, and then putting that out there, whether it's quote unquote the politically popular direction or not, to say this is what we stand for, because this is what it takes to match the scale and urgency of need in our community. We're going to aim to earn a mandate for that to get going on day one. Well,
you said you're going to have a lot of time to sort of unspool this, and in that spirit, we will have plenty of time to hopefully continue the conversation and have you back as the race unfolds and dig into a lot of those policy issues that you're talking about in more depth. But it was great to have you on today to just sort of give people, I think, maybe a little bit more of a sense of who you are, the person, and the background that you're bringing to what I think is going to be a pretty interesting race for the city going forward. So, Michelle Wu, thanks so much for joining us on the Codcast.
Thank you. I'm always eager to come back because we have the wonkiest discussions on this podcast. We float some ideas, so I'm happy to get to actually go a different direction today and then come back some other time for some of that policy stuff.
Great. And so this has been another episode of the Codcast. I'm Michael Jonas from Commonwealth Magazine for my colleague Bruce Moll. Thanks everyone for listening. We'll see you next time.